Yeah. So we're going to uh, talk a little bit about background and user research. Basically, you feel like there's a problem, right? So you know that you feel like there's a problem, but you need to really understand that problem. So we're going to talk about how to, consider background research. Basically, what you've probably done so far is background research. Um, just trying to make sure that the problem that you're trying to solve actually does exist. And then we're going to transition to user research, which is a very, very big topic. As a product manager, sometimes you'll be the one responsible for doing user research, or sometimes it might be the UX designer who's responsible for doing user research. Or you would have to work closely with them to do user research, like a combination of the both of you. We're also going to talk about running kickoff meetings. Basically, when you're trying to build a product, you're basically working in a development team. So how do you then get these people, excited about the project or the product that you're working on? So we're going to talk about one of the brainstorming sessions you can also do during your kickoff meeting to brainstorm some ideas on how to solve the problem, but also to um, help with team building. Team building is very, very important in the product team. You have to make sure that everyone in the team is comfortable and everyone is, committed to the product that you're trying to build. And then finally, another big topic, MVP experiments, basically how to run minimum viable product experiments for product development. Okay, so quick recap. We talked about introduction to product management in the last class. We also talked about lean product management. Within lean, we talked about how agile, uh, uh, product management basically is how, you apply the lean thinking paradigm to software development. We also talked about how it is used, the idea of being agile or developing a product in an agile way is to use as little resources as possible to solve the problem and to not use resources until they're absolutely needed. We also talked about the frameworks that help us implement agile philosophy, um, actual framework we can follow, like the Scrum and Kanban process. We also talked about how it is always better to make things that people want than to make people want things, right? Because if they actually already want it, it will be a lot easier to get to sell it to them as opposed to trying to convince them that they need something that they didn't think that they wanted, right? We talked about age-old problems, different solutions to those problems. We also talked about the designing for motivation as opposed to attributes. So understanding why people do things, not just what they do, is really, really important. And we also talked about why it's important to understand um, exactly the roots of what they actually want, not just what they're trying to tell you. And then I talked a little bit, oh, I didn't actually talk about my project, but I talked about the assignment. So I'm going to be talking, I'm actually, just like everyone else, working on a project as well. This is actually a work project that I started recently, and I thought might be, share a little bit of context on how the product development process works in a big tech company. So basically, the first item for today is to pick a problem space, right? So how do we determine how do we determine what is a real problem that people want? Well, this can actually come from personal pain points, right? You might try to build a product. I think someone mentioned that she's working on an assignment or a project to help autistic families get information to help their children. And she actually said that she's actually in that situation. So, she's able to feel empathy towards the problem because she's actually in that situation as well. It's a little bit easier to find clues for a solution because, again, this is a problem that you're actually dealing with yourself. So it's really, really easy. It's also motivated by passionate. It's also motivated you know, being a key stakeholder, someone who actually has that problem, you are, potentially more motivated to solve that problem, because solving that problem for everyone actually solve that problem for yourself as well, right? And then usually this is more applicable to business, to customer, as well as internal product manager. So for example, you know, you could be an Instagram user, right? And you might decide that you don't want people to know how many likes you have, or you don't want your pictures to stay prominent on the Instagram platform. And that is basically why you have decided, with your team, of course, to build the Instagram story feature within Instagram, right? Just following up on the assignment that I started. I mean, the example that I started with last week. And then also, this pain point might actually come from others, right? So think about it. If you are a business to business product manager, you're probably not solving problems for yourself. You're solving problems for your customers or for your clients, right? So this could also be a source of a pain point or a problem that you're actually trying to solve. Maybe your organization is basically in the business of solving problems for others. So in this case, you're a little bit less biased, right? If it's a personal pain point, then you might actually think that you know all the answers, you know all the parameters. You might not spend as much time, with research, or you feel like you know exactly what the problem is. But that might not be the case, because the way the problem actually works for you might be different for other people. So that's one of the advantages of solving pain points for others, because you're not biased by what you actually want or what you think is the solution. It also encourages you to learn, right? Because if it's a problem that you're not actually facing, you would actually have to take yourself out of your comfort zone, out of the situation, to actually empathize and actually understand what other people are actually feeling. And then that way you actually learn about new business processes, learn about new technologies, all that. And but also, it's yeah, like I said, it's more applicable to business product manager. Okay. Second, the next one. Okay, so understanding. So I've basically decided to work on one of the problems that I found with some of my customers. So I mentioned during the last class that I'm actually a product manager at Microsoft, and my product is around the different Azure services that revolve around container technology. So you don't need to know what container technology is, but basically it's a technology that helps developers be more productive by making it easy for them to deploy their code more quickly. And there's lots of other features, but that's basically one of the main features of container technology. So basically, I was trying to understand, so this is a pain point that I had at the time, right? So I was trying to understand Azure policies for AKS. So you don't need to know what AKS is. Basically, it's the name of my product. It was the name of one of my products. And Azure policies basically allows you to set policies within your cloud environment that restrict what other people can do. When you do that, you can actually uh, govern your cloud infrastructure to make sure that it's more safe, it's more secure, and also only certain people have access to do certain things. Maybe some business process rules are actually enforced, so that basically you don't have to go through everything, go through every log to see if everyone is following the rules. You can actually automate that process using the policies. So if anyone tries to do anything that violates that policy, it wouldn't work, right? So that's basically what Azure Policies is. So I was trying to understand how to use Azure Policies, which is a general thing that expands everywhere around Azure. By the way, Azure is basically Microsoft's cloud platform, which allows people to basically use Microsoft computers to get stuff done, right? So whenever you see Azure, just think of cloud technology using Microsoft resources to get your work done, right? And AKS, again, is the container technology that I personally work on. So I was trying to understand, okay, we know what Azure policy is. IT teams have been using Azure policies for years, but how do you use Azure policies for AKS, right? How do you use Azure policies to actually help you have a secure, AKS environment, right? So basically, I try to break the problem down. The problem being, I don't understand how Azure policy works for AKS, right? So basically, I try to understand, okay, so what is Azure policies in general? And then the reason why I needed to understand Azure policies for AKS was because I am working on a project that's around this, I guess, this service called ESLZ, right? And ESLZ basically is it allows you to have a cloud environment in general that is secure and is governed by policies, right? But then I then have this environment, this AKS environment that I need to work within this ESLZ environment, right? But for me to have my AKS environment that works within ESLZ, I need to understand how policies affect AKS, right? So I had this big problem and I was basically able to break it down. So I'm sure in your case also, you might be able to break that problem into smaller pieces that could actually help you. You can have a big problem like how do I um, how do I make it so that I can post pictures on Instagram in a way that it doesn't stay on my profile and I don't have to worry about whether or not people like that picture. That's a big problem, right? But if you break it down into little pieces, it's a little bit easier to solve. So that's basically what I did there. I broke it down into little pieces. And then I found out that if you look at to learn about the secure baseline, basically, it's one of the implementation of Azure policies for AKS, right? So I'm like, okay, well, someone out there has already done this Azure policies thing for AKS, right? So maybe I could just see what they did and actually understand how, have some ideas of how policies work, right? And then when I had some understanding of how the policy worked using that secure baseline, work that someone else had already done, then I wanted to clarify with my team, okay, well, this is what I learned. I noticed that within the secure baseline, this is actually how they use Azure policy for AKS. Is this something that, we're finding other customers using? Are we finding that other customers are using Azure policy for AKS this way? Also, do we think this is actually the correct way to use Azure policies for AKS, right? So these are some of the things that I did for my background research, right? So when you do background research, the various ways you can do that. So generally, you can read articles, right? So in the other case, someone had a problem. I realized that it's very difficult to get information about autistic students, right? So how do you actually make sure or like understand the problem a little bit better to make sure that you're not the only one having that problem? You can actually go online and read articles, right? You can see what other people have actually done. So the reference implementation, which is basically the reference implementation is the secure baseline that someone else already did. So someone else already tried to solve that problem using secure baseline, right? So someone else has already solved that problem before. How did they solve that problem, right? So in the case of the autistic information case, how have other people actually tried to solve that problem? And then, you can do research. You can check out research papers. You can maybe see what is the latest way people are actually, trying to tackle this lack of lack of information issue. And then also talk to other people, right? So if you know other people who are from autistic families, for example, or you have other, in my case, you have other cloud solutions architects who are trying to solve the same problem, right? They can actually give you some background information of their perspective of what that problem is, right? So when I do some background research, here are some of the things that I learned, right? So governance and security is really important for all organizations, right? So what I said about Azure policies, it is a very important feature of Azure because it helps you have a secure environment and prevents people from having access to stuff that they're not supposed to have access to, right? Um, lots of people would actually not use AKS if it's not secure, right? So they might actually spend a lot of time trying to make sure, or manually trying to make sure that their AKS environment is secure, which will actually take a really long time, right? But the thing about what I also learned is Azure Policies is a great way to automate the governance of your AKS environment, right? So using the policy is actually a very effective way to secure your environment, right? So now I know that is true. Initially, I had the problem, but then through my research, I was actually able to find out that it is a useful feature for people to have more secure environment, right? And also, there are no formal resources to learn about Azure policies specifically for AKS, right? So there are resources for learning about Azure policies in general, but not AKS, right? So we do have some documentation, some articles about it, but there's no formal resource to help people in a structured way understand how to use Azure policies for AKS, right? So those are some of the things you can get by doing a little bit of background research. User research, on the other hand, is a whole. Basically, when you have some background research and you have some, you're more confident that this is a real problem, then you actually want to do some user research. But before that, let me just pause for a bit and see if people have any questions. Oops. Sorry about that. Oh yeah, does anyone have any questions?
Yes, thanks, Ayo. I'd like to know, is there any particular number of interviews you should do before you're convinced maybe this project is something you should work on?
I think it depends on this. Yeah, my favorite answer to every question, which is
It
basically
depends.
it depends. So I would say, in this case, for example, I would probably go with maybe 10 people. 5 people might be enough. As long as you can basically decide on that situation, based on the situation and how much information you're trying to get. If you feel like 5 people, after talking to 5 people, you actually have enough information to start with the MVP process, then you can probably stop there.
Okay, thank you.
Any questions in the chat?
There is one question in the chat about what are good open source or free sources for user research.
Okay, yeah, that's a really good question. So I will actually go over the user research process. In terms of open source, I'm not sure if I mean, you can use tools like data analysis, right? Like if you're trying to understand based on data or based on trends, maybe you can find some information on the internet about user surveys. You can actually use surveys or actually use data that your organization might have to understand how users are actually using the product, right? So in terms of tools, those are probably more around data analysis tools being able to analyze data to help you understand customer behavior. But I think on the other hand, which is basically what we're going to focus on here, is around customer interviews. I mean, I don't know if there's any specific tools for that. Maybe just the tools for online interviewing, stuff like that. But yeah, hopefully that answers the question. But yeah, we're going to dive deeper into user research. Okay, does anyone have their hands up right now? I actually can't see it, so let me know if anyone has their hands up.
Everyone's good for now.
Okay, awesome. Back to user research. Basically, the first step in the user research is you want to identify your customer segment. You want to understand, okay, so who are the customers who actually have this problem? When do they have it? Like who are the ones you want to concentrate on? Obviously, the most obvious thing is you want to make sure that the customers that you're targeting or the people that you're targeting for this user research actually have that problem, right? You don't want to ask people who don't have that problem questions. I mean, you can always ask people, but that wouldn't be real user research. Actually, can everyone mute themselves? Okay. So basically, you want to identify the types of customers who could potentially have this problem. So in my case, basically the customers that could have this problem are customers who use Azure. So basically, Azure customers that use AKS clusters, right? So Azure customers that use AKS clusters. So customers looking to govern their AKS clusters, that's a subset of that. Sometimes you might not know who those people are, but basically the only people who can have this problem are the ones that are using AKS within Azure, right? So you also want to define the user goals. So some of the goals could be stuff like learn how customers go about governing the clusters. In this case, like how are they doing that right now, right? Are they using policies? Are they using something else? Someone want to mute themselves? Problems they're facing learning how to govern the cluster. So what are the issues that they're actually having when they try to govern the clusters? How are policies used to govern the clusters, right? So what are actually different options that they have? So we mentioned Azure policies, but are there other ways, like how exactly what type of governance are policies able to help customers with, right? Because maybe there's some limitations of policies, maybe there's other things that need to be done. So basically, how are policies used to govern clusters? What are some of the overhead that goes into governing clusters? So for example, are people doing it manually right now? Do they have lots of, IT resources, lots of employees who are manually who are manually governing the clusters to make sure that people have the right access, or like people are not doing what they're not supposed to do, right? So if lots of customers are actually spending a lot of time doing that manually, then it just makes it more valuable that we need to provide this feature and make it easy for customers to use it. Also, what are the risks of not governing your AKS clusters properly, right? So what would then happen if they decide not to govern their clusters? What if they just leave it everything default and they don't do that? Well, what would then happen? Well, if that's going to be a big regulatory issue, or if it means that they're going to get hacked, or if for example, based on the laws, they have that would be a big problem. Then this is a real big this is a real problem that needs to be solved, and the more critical it is to govern your cluster, the more valuable this product would actually be, right? And then the next step, basically, after you define your goals, like this is what I need to know by the end of my research, you can then pick a method, right? So you can use customer interviews or you can use surveys. So someone asked earlier, what are tools that you can use? Well, for surveys, you can probably use SurveyMonkey. Like there's lots of survey tools that you can use to conduct surveys. Basically, you need to have a list of customers that you can email and actually have them fill out the surveys. So basically, I guess there might be tools around, getting emails or getting people to sign up so that you can then get their emails, so that you can then send survey questions to them. In this class, I'm going to be focusing on customer interviews. I feel like surveys are quite straightforward, but interviews has a lot of nuances to it. So that's what we're going to focus on. Okay, so after you pick your research method, you basically want to execute on the research plan, right? So to execute, you need to understand like what are the questions, what are the actual questions that you're going to ask during these customer interviews, right? Sorry, just 1 second. Yeah, so what are the questions you want to ask during this customer interviews? You also maybe what you want to write a script, right? Because you don't want to get there and have to figure out what to say after you get there. So in addition to actually having the actual questions you're going to ask, you might also want to write the script that, okay, at the beginning, this is actually what I'm going to say. It doesn't have, you don't never expect the interview to go exactly how you planned. So don't try too hard to stick to the script, but actually having written down, some ideas of how you feel like that interview would go, in addition to the questions, would actually help you be more confident and more prepared for the interview. So another one might be to speak to 10 people. So someone asked earlier, how many people, or how do you know how many people? Well, I would say 10 people is usually a good number, but depending on your case, depending on how much time you have, you might have to go with less people. But if your problem has lots of very, very different types of stakeholders, then you might need to do more than 10 people, but 10 people is usually a good number. Okay, so next, I will go over the 4 different types of user interviews. The first one is the exploratory interview. So this is basically the most free-form type of interview, and your goal, you're trying to see if you have a point, like if there's actually, if this problem actually exists, if customers are open to a certain solution, generally understand what they're feeling about the problem. So again, this is the most free form of the interview. You also, maybe you want to understand what they look like. Generally how are the processes, like how do they operate on a daily basis, right? How do they go about solving this problem, right? So you're basically exploring, you're fishing for ideas, you're finding things customers have problems with. Very, very important thing to do in user interviews is to actually be able to see them, to be able to see the reactions, like see how they're reacting to certain questions that you're asking them, right? So for example, if you see the eyes light up during that interview, like, oh, like, whenever I try to get to, I don't know, downtown from wherever I live, there's always lots of traffic. Like, this is such a big problem in the city, just seeing how passionate they are about that problem can actually help you gauge how important solving that problem is. Like if they're excited, if they seem really angry, you can actually use that to gauge whether or not, this is actually a really important question. I mean, problem for that customer. It also gives you an insight on what you can or you can't build. You do this when you're trying to come up with ideas, like I said, so ways to change your product, ways to expand it. You may also have, you might actually have a backlog of features you want to build, but you can never run out of ways to come up with, new ideas on how to solve the problems. So some of the exploratory questions that I would ask in my case, in my problem would be, how do you govern your clusters right now, right? What problems are you having figuring out how to govern your clusters? Like, is it a real problem? Like trying to understand if it's a real problem. Customers have, if governing their clusters is actually very, very easy, then, there's no problem. Maybe it's just me who doesn't understand how to do it, but like no one else has that problem, right? So asking those exploratory questions at the beginning, very early on, will actually help you understand whether or not this is a real problem. What happens if you have non-compliance in your cluster? Basically, how important is it to actually have a well-governed cluster? If nobody cares about that, then maybe it's not a real problem. So validation problems, basically, you have a theory, right? You have a theory of that you like to test out, right? So you feel like you have a solution or you have something that will be valuable to the customers and you want to test that out. That's basically when you do validation interviews. This is usually by far the most common type of interview, right? So an example of a theory could be if there was an easier way to learn how to govern your cluster, customers can onboard their workloads more quickly, right? So your solutions are theories until you launch and you get product market fit, right? Whatever whatever idea you think you have, it's just a theory because you don't know. You don't know if you're the only one having problem. You don't know if anyone's actually going to um, pay for this problem. Maybe there is a problem, but no one's actually going to pay for it, or no one actually cares about it. You basically want to validate your ideas to make sure that it's actually valid, right? Very important when you're doing these interviews. You do not want to bias your your people. So basically, you don't want to say questions like if if I if I basically okay, so for example, you can be like, if I was to create a course to make it easy for you to secure your cluster, would you take that course? Well, they're probably going to say yes, right? Like that's just leading them directly to a solution, right? But if you do stuff like that, basically they're always going to say yes. So if you know that they're always going to say yes in that case, then why are you asking the question? There's no point of the interview if you already know what the answer is before you ask, right? So and also you don't want to get push them towards a certain direction, right? Because if you do, then there's basically no value. You're just basically having a conversation with that person, and you're trying to convince them that they need this product, as opposed to actually getting the information that you need to actually solve that problem. So instead of actually biasing them, you want to push them in the direction of talking about the problem you're trying to solve and see if they themselves can actually find that solution and then you're proposing on their own. So for example, you can be like, instead of talking about the learn, you can be like, how does your team learn how to use Azure features, right? Instead of asking direct questions, right? Which is basically yes or no. Would you take this course? You can be like, how do they learn how to use Azure features in the first place, right? What are the troubles your team is having learning about Azure features, right? If they're like, oh, like we just use Microsoft Learn, then obviously you know that your solution to build a Learn module is probably a good idea, right? Has your team used Microsoft Learn in the past to learn about Azure product? Basically, just think about the way I asked that question, right? Have they already done it in the past? It's very different from if I was to build a module, would you use it? Because in the heat of the moment, no one really knows whether or not they're actually going to use it. They think they might use it, but they might. But they might not, right? But if they have actually used it in the past, then you know for sure that Microsoft Learn is actually something that they used to learn. Also, you want to know how often, right? If it's something that one of the employees has used once and stop using it, then that might be a red flag. Maybe Microsoft Learn is not a good solution to learn how to use Azure resources. So satisfaction-oriented interviews, basically, you're trying to understand if your customers are jumping ship to go to your competitors, and or more important than that, like more important of whether or not they're jumping ship, because you can basically see that data. You can actually check your database and see customers actually churning and not using your product as much anymore. But more importantly, you want to understand why, right? So you know yeah, it is really important to, again, the why question is probably the most important question when it comes to user research. You want to understand why the jumping ship. Maybe you also want to understand the root of their dissatisfaction, or maybe you want to know what you're doing right. Like you want to understand what is the best thing about this new feature, or what is the best thing about our product, right? So you know that this is, and they would actually tell you exactly how that feature has actually helped them, right? And then you can actually get some more ideas of, oh, I never even knew that this feature that I built could actually be used in this case, right? So that is actually really some of the reasons why it's really important to have satisfaction oriented interviews. So some of those questions in my case could be stuff like, how has the second exercise in the learn module been helpful? So obviously you can only have satisfaction oriented interviews after you build a product or after you have an MVP, after customers have actually tried out what you're trying to use your solution, that's when you can ask those questions, right? So in this case, you can ask, how has the second exercise in the Learn module been helpful to help you rapidly launch your workloads on AKS? So this is not a hypothetical question. You're basically asking them directly, tell us exactly how that exercise helped you, solve this problem, right? You can also even have a more open-ended question. What do we need to stop doing? For example, right? They can be like, you know what, Microsoft Learn sucks. I prefer to go on YouTube to learn how to do these things, right? So they would actually tell you. You're not going to ask them, do you like Microsoft Learn? No, but you can ask them, what do you want us to stop doing? They would then lead you to that answer themselves without you actually asking them leading questions. Another one could be, what is the one thing we can do to make your learning, to make the learning module better for you? So maybe, for example, the exercise doesn't work. Maybe they have some other innovative ideas of how they actually train their internal employees. You can actually learn that by asking this question. So efficiency interviews, basically, you want to understand how is this product being used, um, how, how the product actually ingrains within the life of your customers, and most of all, you want to understand how to improve it to better serve the purpose, right? So some of the things you want to understand is, okay, so who are the people using this product, right? Is it only the IT people? Is it only the developers that are going and actually learning this stuff, or is it everyone, right? Is it the decision makers who are deciding whether or not to use AKS? Who are the people that are actually using this? When and under what circumstances, right? So do they basically, like, how do they even find it, right? Do they basically go on Google and be like, how do I learn how to do this? And then they get to the the Learn module, or do they know that Microsoft Learn is the one place to go, so they go there directly? Is it easy for them to actually find that specific AKS Learn module within all of the hundreds of Microsoft Learn modules that we already have? Is it easy for them? Is it a do they actually need to ask someone at Microsoft that what is the best way to learn this technology before that person then told them, oh, go to this learn module, right? Also, what are the parts that actually degrading? So for example, are there specific things within our module that made it too long for them to finish that module? And as a result of that, maybe they didn't learn everything you wanted them to learn because they spent way too much time using this specific feature of the Learn module, right? So some of the questions could be, how easy was it to complete the exercise following the instruction provided, right? So basically exercises on Microsoft Learn modules, they give it a theory of the situation and the cases where it can be helpful and how it can be helpful. And then you have the exercises where they give you step-by-step instruction on how to actually, do that thing. So you're actually following the steps and you're actually doing it on your computer as you're reading it. So basically, was it possible for them to complete the exercise using the instruction? Or maybe your instruction assumes too much. Maybe your instruction thinks that they already know how to do this, so it didn't give them detailed information on how to complete the exercise, right? So basically, how easy was it to complete the exercise? Or how was it to find the module, right? There's hundreds of different modules about just AKS itself. How easy was it for them to find out governance module that they were looking for? This organization provides sandbox environment for employees to follow along on exercises. To follow along on these exercises, sometimes they need to deploy Azure resources on their cloud environment, right? But Azure resources cost money, right? So does that employee actually give their employees credit to be able to test out these exercises themselves so they can learn? Or do the employees have to use their own money to do that? If customers are not providing that environment, then maybe this is not a viable option, or this is not helpful for them because employees are not going to spend their money to learn how to do something, right? Also, it would help you know whether or not you need to provide, Microsoft ourselves need to provide those resources to them so that they would then not have to worry about getting credit. They can just use the free credits that Microsoft gives them. Also, did they try answering the knowledge check correctly, or did they just randomly select options to get the random answer? So basically, part of the learning module is that they're going to ask you some multiple choice questions, right? And if you get the questions wrong, then it's going to tell you this is why the answer was wrong, and pick another option, right? So are people actually spending time to, read the question carefully, try to understand, try to answer those problems correctly, and then when it says they're wrong, then they learn something of why they were wrong, and that would actually improve the learning experience. So the question is, are people actually doing it the way you think they're going to do it, or are they just randomly picking the wrong answer just so they can get to the next part of the learning module, right? So if customers are just randomly doing that, then maybe nobody cares about that thing that you thought would be useful, right? Maybe you need to take out those multiple choice questions and just put the answers there, so it's a little bit easier for them. So I basically talked about 4 types of interviews. Hopefully, my context helps it be a little bit easier for you to design these interviews yourselves and actually use that as a product manager or as a CEO trying to launch a new product. Yeah. So next step, basically, I want to talk about some of the best practices, right? So talking about, so I think you need to make sure that you're actually talking about their problems, not your solution, right? So when you are conducting these interviews, your goal is not to show them how awesome your new feature is, right? Your job is not to tell them, oh, by the way, check out this new learning module that we developed for you. It's great. It does this, this, and this. What do you think, right? That is not the goal. The goal is basically to get them to talk about their problems that will help you understand why that problem is really important. Understanding the why is the most important question you can answer during the user research. So here's a great quote to actually live by. Customers may not know what they want, but they can't hide what they need, right? So getting them to talk about their problems would actually help you understand what they really need, as opposed to telling them your solution. They're like, oh, do you want this? Or here's a solution that we're thinking. Do you want this? Right? They would probably don't even know what they want, but they can definitely not hide what they need. Your customer should be talking about 95% of the time, right? This is not a 50-50 conversation or you spending all the time presenting this awesome features you just built. You want them talking, right? You ask a question and you should be answering in detail, right? You want to nudge them, make them comfortable to answer in detail. The point is to get off point. Think about that. The whole point of the interview is to get off point. Let them ramble along. Don't worry about them answering or them not answering questions exactly the way you expect them to, or not going into the specific topics that you want. I mean, you can always nudge them in that direction if that's what you need to know, but don't worry too much about that. Embrace the idea of going on a tangent, right? Sometimes the best ideas actually come from customers talking about, things that are off tangent, completely unexpected, that you will probably never even think of asking, right? You also want to have, you want to make sure that you're creating a comfortable environment. You want to have rapport with them. The more they like you, the more they would disclose of them. So, for example, like when you start an interview, you don't want to immediately start asking questions. You want to make sure that they're comfortable with you. Make an effort to make them feel like you're actually interested in them, like you're trying to understand them outside of this specific scenario that you're trying to ask them questions about. Also don't ask them questions that would be difficult for them to answer in person, right? Like you don't want to ask them personal questions like, have you ever cheated on an exam, right? Also don't because they would, they probably wouldn't want to say to give you that personal information, right? Also, don't defend the idea or the product that you're trying to present. This is really, really important, right? When they give you negative feedback, it's possible that they're just testing you, right? If you respond negatively to their test, they're less likely to give you truthful, honest information in the future because they don't want to deal with the confrontation, right? Because they know you're going to be defensive. So when they see you respond in a non-judgmental way, they're more likely to tell you the truth. So basically, again, you want to probe as much as possible. When they say something, you can be like, interesting. Tell me more. Like you want to keep them talking. You want to keep being like, okay, can you give me more information about that? Can you explain that further? Oh, you just mentioned this. What does that actually mean? You want to make sure that they might be using some internal jargon that you don't understand. So you want to make sure that you're actually probing and actually understanding like what they're actually saying, not what you think they're actually saying. Like I said before, pay close attention to the facial expressions, right? So they might actually get excited sometimes. They might be angry. Like all those types of cues. When we talk about communication, right? They say a very high percentage of communication is actually more on the body language and the expression as opposed to the words. Like I think I read somewhere about 20% of the actual communication comes from the words themselves. But 80% or a much higher percentage comes from the expression, the body language, the tone of their voice. Also, you're basically hunting for clues, right? Like you're trying to get clues from what they're actually saying to help you understand exactly what the problem is. So don't just pay attention you should pay attention to them and what they're saying, but while they're saying that, you want to understand, get some clues on how to best, solve that problem. You also want to note your observations, obviously. You don't want to have to like remember everything. Um, you want to interview actual customers, like people who actually have that problem, not just someone who you're friends with who doesn't have that problem, but you just want to get their opinion, right? I mean, you can always do that, but when it comes to user research, you actually have to ask actual potential customers. So in this case, basically, customers who use AKS on Azure. Uh, Another really good technique, again, I think I mentioned some techniques that were actually borrowed from lean manufacturing. This is another one that I actually used when I was an engineer. Basically, it's called the concept of 5 why. So they say something, you ask why, right? And then they'll say something else, right? Basically, they'll explain to you why they thought, why they did that or why that was the situation. But that is actually not the root cause of the problem, right? So this technique is actually used extensively in root cause analysis in manufacturing and other places. Basically, they say something and you ask why. And then they say that. And then you ask, why did that happen or why? Like, basically, the idea is to ask the question why at least 3 times. But, for best practices or like you want to try to ask at least 5 times. And usually by the time you get to the fourth time you're saying why, or the fifth time you're saying why, you can actually get to the root cause of the problem. Also, obviously, you can combine interview types, right? I know I mentioned 4 different interview types. You can't do satisfaction until you have something that they've actually tested. But sometimes you might want to combine validation interviews with like with exploratory interviews, right? So these are just ways to like think about how you might have to interview customers over different course of development process, right? So at the beginning, you might start with this, or actually it might be a combination of this and this, right? So yes, it's okay. You don't have to actually pigeonhole yourself. You can have a combination of 2 or more interview types. Yeah, so basically, in summary, or just some additional tips, if you find yourself stuck or you're unable to proceed, you can basically reignite the conversation by saying something like, that's interesting. Tell me more. That trick actually always works because, when they say something and then you react that way, it actually gets them fired up. It actually helps them feel like you really care, but it also helps you get to the root cause of that problem, right? To actually understand what's actually going on. Another technique that's always helpful is, if you get lost and you don't know which direction to go or with the conversation, you might also want to use the 5 Ws, right? Which are which, which are who, right? So who are the people having this problem? What, when, why, and where, right? So who are the customers? Who are the people having this problem, right? What are their habits? What do they do, right, around that problem? When do they use your product, right? Do they only use it when they get stuck, or do they use it as part of the general training process when they have new employees? Where do they need your product, right? So basically, do they need it for all of their AKS clusters or only the ones that are exposed to the internet, for example, right? And most importantly, like I always say, is the why. Why do they need your product, right? Customer interviews are all about filling in your knowledge gap in those 5 questions. The more conversation you have with your customers, the more you'll be able to understand the 5 Ws and have a better holistic understanding of your product and how it would actually impact people. So, what are good questions? What are bad questions, right? Don't ask open-ended questions. Basically, open-ended questions are questions that can open-ended questions are questions that can be answered with simple yes or no, right? Or questions that don't provide just one piece of information, right? The opposite is basically closed-ended questions. Here's an example. So here's an example of a closed-ended question. When you ask a question like, is it raining outside, right? Obviously, the answer is yes or no. You only get one data point, right? And that's not very useful, right? Another way to frame that question, depending on the concept, would be like, what do you do when it's rainy? What do you do on rainy days, right? So then to then go on a tangent on exactly what they do on rainy days, right? And that's basically how you can learn how to build products around that. So obviously you can get better product ideas. Also, you don't, again, open close-ended questions. You don't want to ask binary questions, basically similar to the first point, which is basically questions that where the answer is yes or no. You also don't want to ask a hypothetical question. The reason for this is people don't actually know what they would do in hypothetical situations, right? They might think they know, but they actually don't until they've actually been in that situation. They're not very useful. So, say for example, here's an example of a hypothetical question. If you're a painter, would you buy a subscription service of canvases if the subscription was reasonably priced and the canvas was high quality, right? The reason why this kind of question actually fails is that people are illogical in fictitious, in hypothetical situations. But when you actually bring that situation down to earth, so actually things that they understand, they'll give you information that's actually easier for you to understand, as opposed to them talking about some, fictitious world, and help you get more accurate information. You do not want to ask leading questions, like I said before. Leading questions are those questions that are designed to bias or influence you. This basically sounds like you are telling them something. Like here's an example. If I was to give you 40% off your car insurance, right? Would you be interested? Obviously, who's going to say no to save 40% on the car insurance? Everybody would actually say yes. You already know the answer to the question. Why are you asking the question? You're not a salesperson. You're a product manager. So basically this basically no point. You don't want to ask questions that would unduly influence your question. So by asking leading questions, you're basically unduly influencing your customers. Also, finally, don't ask questions that will make them lie. So, for example, the question that I said before, which was, have you ever cheated on an exam, or like basically personal questions. You don't want to ask these kind of questions because they're gonna lie, and once they start lying, they're just gonna keep lying, basically. So in summary, focus on open-ended questions, like get as much possible information as possible, and make customers feel more comfortable. Don't ask binary questions, don't ask hypothetical questions, don't ask leading questions. Don't put them in awkward situations where they might lie, and don't ask leading questions. Yeah. Also, there's no reason to, like, this might sound pretty straightforward, but the fact is, this actually causes like really big issues, in the user research process. So you want to make sure that you're very cognizant with this. And in general, there's really no reason to break these rules, right? Like most of these open-ended questions can easily be transformed to better questions, right? The bad questions can pretty easily be transformed to better questions. For example, asking the customer a question, have you ever heard of Uber? That's basically a binary question, yes or no, right? You can easily say, if you need to get across town, like if you need to go to a different, like go downtown, for example, how would you do that? They would then explain to you, if they've actually used Uber before, they would then tell you, I use Uber, right? Like Uber is awesome, blah, 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 right? So it would like I know it would be if I could save you 40% of your auto insurance, would you switch? You can easily change this to if I could save you on insurance by, for example, you having to carpool with your coworkers, right? Or you having to not drive on the weekends or not drive on the weekdays, would you do it? Basically, these are more reasonable questions because it's a real question, right? If you weren't able to use your car during the weekdays or during the weekends, would you be willing to save 40%? These kinds of questions actually provide information as opposed to the previous one, which provides no information. So one final note, don't forget the one statement, which is that's interesting. Tell me more. It really, really does. It really does help. Yeah, so that's basically about user research. So basically, I did some user research in my example, and basically, here are some of the things that I found, right? So policies are used in general. Basically, everyone uses policies. Not everyone uses it for the AKS clusters. Policies for AKS clusters sometimes, can be an afterthought. Maybe they don't really think of some of the more extensive features. Sometimes it takes so much time to learn how to use the policies. There's no formal training, so they have to spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to use it. They're not fully utilizing the features like I said before, and also they would actually like to be able to govern the clusters because it's more secure, right? It helps it so that you can only do things that are within the governance framework and also less overhead, so you can automate a lot of that process. Are there any questions? Oops.
Hi, Ayo. I have a question.
Sure.
It's on. So I'm a career coach. So I have a consulting company, and one of the things that I use a lot is trends. So I'm also a social media influencer, and most of my marketing I do online, and I also follow trends. Can you explain a little bit as to how we can use trends as a tool for this user research, please?
Yes.
And
That's a
also
very.
hashtags and stuff like that.
Sorry, what's the last thing you said?
I said, how can we incorporate trends into
The
user
last.
research and also the use of social media, like using hashtags and things like that?
Right. So basically, I talked about two main ways. Surveys and user interviews. But there are other ways as well to do user research. So, like I mentioned at the beginning, you might actually use internal data to understand, is there a downward trend? Are people actually leaving your platform? You have that data. You also have data on user behavior. For example, no one is actually going to this page on your website, right? Or whenever people go to this page, they always close the website. So maybe there's something wrong with this part of the website. So basically, when you build an application in general, the websites, all the websites, well, most of the websites that we use actually have analytics connected to them. So you can actually track who's actually clicking on stuff, how long people are spending on your website, right? If you expect people to spend, 20, like 20 minutes on your website, but they're only spending 2 minutes and they're dropping off, then you know that there's something wrong, right? So actually being able to understand those trends is actually very, very important. It is a form of user research for sure, and it does help you determine what to do next, where the problems are, what you're doing great. We're actually going to deep, but this basically falls under the realm of matrices, right? As a product manager, you live by the matrices. You live by data. You need to be able to understand: are my customers growing? Is this new feature being used by my customers? Are our customers engaging on social media? What are people saying? What are people actually saying on social media, right? But we're going to be talking about that in detail, which is basically matrices for product managers in the next class. So that's a little sneak peek into what's coming up.
Can I ask one more thing?
Yeah.
Still thinking about trends. What do you think about user forum?
User forum, that is definitely another way to definitely get, it is being used. It's definitely being used. It's definitely being used. But yeah, thanks for actually bringing that up, because obviously everyone gets to learn. I wasn't planning to talk about forums, but it is a really useful tool to understand user behavior, right? So basically, one of the ways forums are actually used is you can actually build a product or a prototype of the product, and you can actually have a subset of your customers actually try out that particular feature or that particular product, not everyone. And within that, you basically have a group of customers who are actually able to discuss about it or provide feedback because they actually have early access to that product. So that's one way you can use user forum. Maybe do you want to explain some other ways you've used user forums?
Yes, I think another way is, so if you are thinking about maybe you've made a product, you are trying to optimize your product, and users' voices are very critical, right? And having a little forum where your users can say how they feel about certain features or their bottlenecks or issues that they would like you to address, I think it helps product managers know how is my product performing, and also helps you to understand which area should I focus on if I'm trying to optimize my product for performance. And if there is any issue, maybe there's a bug or a glitch, forums are the best places to know first, because the users will start to talk about it in a forum and say, hey, is everybody experiencing this or is just me? And then that way you can collect information to understand how many people are having these glitches. Is this something you should escalate and quickly solve before it starts to drive down your engagement of the users on your platform? I have used forums, and I think they're really powerful tools, especially when you already have a product. I think it helps to understand how to optimize the product, to keep the product engaged, and it helps the customers to feel like their voice is being heard by someone, and that escalate their concerns and help to introduce new features that they're really looking for. Now, for new product, like if you're getting a new product, I think it's not a bad idea to start what you said. Like get a couple of people together to start using your product, give you feedback, build that into a forum as the product grows.
Yes, that's a very, very good point. So what I'm showing you right now, basically my product is AKS. Which I've talked about quite a few times already. But basically, here's an example of a forum. I'm sure everyone, or like most people, are probably familiar with GitHub. It's basically, I guess you can call it professional social media for, which basically initially was for developers, but other people are actually using GitHub to host the content. For example, they're using GitHub to collaborate on writing new materials or writing books. We actually use GitHub for Microsoft Learn So you can actually use you can actually have multiple people working on different learn modules, which are not code based. They are writing based. You're basically writing how to use this product, right? So those are some of the ways you can actually use GitHub. But within GitHub, obviously we have Azure, which is Microsoft Azure Cloud Platform, and then AKS within Azure. And this is actually, you can actually call this a user forum because people can actually see what is coming up with AKS, what are some of the things that are coming up. You can actually, provide some feedback directly to the AKS product team using anyone actually has access to do this. If you use AKS and you have a problem, you can actually submit an issue, right? So that's basically what this is for. The way you submit issues, you go to issues. So right now we have 322 open issues. These issues are actually being triaged. So the product team, they're actually, reviewing these issues. Maybe some of them will be rejected because they just don't make sense. So anyone can actually create issues. And within that, you actually, so here's, so basically the issues is where the forum lives, right? So for example, we have, hello, this is a random person. This is not a Microsoft employee. I'm using multiple AKS clusters and I'm trying to use Terraform, blah, blah, blah. And then he talks about his problem, right? And you actually have Microsoft employees responding to this person. Here's the big one. So these ones are actually being, so whatever you see on this project is actually stuff that the product team has actually decided to take from the issues list and add to their backlog. So here you have the backlog. Basically, they're going to work on this. These are the things that they've actually, planning to work on. These are like all the things that maybe they haven't decided if they're going to, they think it's a good idea, but they haven't decided if they're going to do it. But here, they actually have, they're actually planning to do it. And this is in the progress and then public preview, blah, blah, blah. So basically, if you click on this, you can actually see that discussion. And you can actually see, okay, maybe there's not very much discussion on this one. Let's see if there's discussion on this one. Nope, not really. Okay, let's see, defender runtime. Anyways, basically, people can have like full-on conversations under these issues. So people are actually liking it. It's like, no, like this is a really big problem. Like the more likes you have, this is an example of metrics, using metrics for customers. The more people like it, the more the product manager, which is this guy, can actually tell that people actually need this feature. Any more questions? And does that answer the question? Okay.
Not from my side. Thank you, Aya.
Awesome. No problem. So we're gonna give a 3-minute break because we're a little bit behind. So we're gonna give a 3-minute break and then we're gonna continue. Yeah, once you're done with the initial part of the user research, again, like I said, it's an iterative process. You don't just do user research and then move on to the next stage. It's like you're constantly collecting feedback as you develop this new feature. In this case, my feature is a learning module that would help customers use Azure Governance for AKS. So it's an iterative process. Once you're done with that, the next stage is, okay, you want to define jobs to be done, right? So last class, I introduced the concept of jobs to be done and how that could actually help you frame your problems. So basically, the job that our customers are trying to do is basically to govern their AKS clusters. That's basically the job that they're trying to get done, right? So in order to do that, here are some of the things that they would want to do. So for example, understand the scenario where Azure policies can help govern their clusters, right? Because everything has a limit, right? So what are some of the scenarios where it could be helpful, right? You need to do that before you can actually govern your cluster. You also want to rapidly set up your governance for your AKS clusters. You don't want to spend 6 months architecting how to use governance for your AKS clusters. Also, you want to understand how policies affect the governance of your clusters, right? So what would happen if you have someone's already doing something illegal and then you add a policy to it? What would happen, right? Would that previously deployed resource get destroyed, or does it just mean that in the future you wouldn't be able to do that again, right? How does that then affect your compliance for your workloads. Because if it doesn't disable the bad actors, then maybe you need to go back and actually do some work to actually make those other things compliant, right? So you also want to understand how to identify non-compliant resources. Obviously, if it happens that it doesn't disable those resources, then you will need to know how to identify those resources that are not compliant. So now that I know what the jobs to be done are that I want to focus on, because obviously governing AKS clusters is a huge thing, and I do not have nearly enough resources to do all that myself. I am just going to focus on some of these scenarios over here, basically breaking the problem into little pieces. If I can do my little piece, then George from the product team can do his piece, and everyone will be happy, right? Teamwork. So let's see. Okay, so how do you write problem statements? You need to have problem statements to be able to communicate with your team on exactly what problem you're trying to solve, right? So how do you communicate that? You want to have a problem statement. How do you write a problem statement? Here's a really simple way to do it. You can use the how might, you can create a how might we statement. Basically, for example, how might we internet action for primary user so that this would happen, right? So when you write a problem this way, it's a lot easier to communicate. It's a lot easier to focus on, a customer problem and exactly start having some ideas on how you can actually solve that problem. So basically, here's my example. How might we make it easier for customers to govern the clusters so that they can set up secure, compliant environments more quickly so that we can accelerate the onboarding of their workloads? Basically, my job is to make it so that customers are using Azure as much as possible, but using it in a way that helps them be successful, right? Not just use it for using case, but to help them be successful, right? So basically, one of the ways that I'm trying to do that is to make it easier for them to govern their clusters. And the reason, and then the effect that that would actually bring is that it would make it much easier and much quicker for them to set up the clusters without having to spend 6 months architecting their clusters. And that would ultimately accelerate the onboarding process, which means that we get to get money more quickly. So here comes the fun part of today. It's your turn. Everyone already defined a problem. So this is basically your opportunity to convert your problem to a problem statement. So I will give everyone 3 minutes. Basically, yeah, 3 minutes to convert their problem, the problem into a problem statement, just like I did. And so here's my problem statement at the bottom. You can take a look at it for some guidance. So everyone, I would suggest if you have a problem you're trying to solve, just create a problem statement and we'll continue in 2 minutes. Starting the timer now. Oh, sorry. Okay. I just realized that I forgot to unmute myself, which is awesome. Okay, so yeah, putting it all together, hopefully everyone has their problem statements ready. So basically putting everything that we just talked about together. The goal here is of today's class is basically to understand what problem to solve, right? So basically you pick a pain point. This could be a personal or it could be, someone else's pain point, right? You want to perform some research on it to make sure that, this is a real problem. You want to, document your findings. Basically, you can use a method called themes, basically to document all the findings from your interviews and your surveys and all that. You want to identify various jobs to be done, which is basically what I mentioned, what I want to focus on, because governing a cluster has a lot of different parts to it. So I would just focus on my little part, and hopefully we'll be successful. And then the fifth step basically is we want to create a hypothesis. So that is basically what we're going to do. Just give me 1 second. So next, we're gonna talk about the hypothesis. Yeah. So before I talk about hypothesis, now that you have your problem defined and you know it's a real problem and you've decided to actually tackle this problem, you're not going to solve the problem yourself, right? As a product manager, you are generally not the person who's building the product or building the feature. So you basically need to work in a team. And to start working in a team, usually it's a great idea to have a kickoff meeting, right? So basically a kickoff meeting is usually around the first meeting. You might have some individual meetings with the individual, the developers on your team, just to understand them and recognize their motivations and their priorities and, maybe their development goals and whatever else you need to understand about your developers and if you work with data scientists, same thing. If you work with UX designer, same thing, right? So you might, as a product manager, you probably want to have one-on-one discussions with them. But after all that, then you want to have a kickoff meeting. Everyone gets to come together, and the goal is to communicate the vision of your feature or your product. You also want to gather some ideas, and most important, also very important, you want to gain their investment, right? So in my case, for example, sometimes I have to pitch ideas to developers and cloud solutions architects to help me build my solutions. So you want to get their investment. Sometimes you will actually be assigned developers to help you build your product. But even when you get assigned, you have to get them invested, because if they're not motivated to build a product, they're probably not going to do a great job, or they're probably not going to work as quickly. Okay, so here's another fun part, right? I would encourage everyone to participate in this. And basically,
I think your screen stopped sharing. Will you be able to share your screen again?
oh, sorry.
No worries.
Let's see. Okay, so sorry about that. Let's see. So yeah, this is basically what I was talking about. You want to communicate the vision, you want to gather ideas, and you also want to get their investment. So how do you run a kickoff meeting? Basically, like I said, these are the topics you want to cover during the kickoff meeting. One of the ways, the other things, the important things you need to do is gather some ideas. How do we solve this problem, right? As a product manager, you're not the idea person. Your job is basically to figure out what is important to build, and also to prioritize, how to build it and all that. But it's not your job to actually come up with all the ideas, right? So the kickoff meeting is actually a really good opportunity to perform a team building activity, which I'm about to go over. That would also help you generate some ideas. So I'd like to present the concept of it's usually called crazy eights, but just for the sake of time, I'm using crazy sixes. And basically the idea is to take a piece of paper. Hopefully everyone has a piece of paper, and over the next 6 minutes, write 6 ideas to solve a problem, right? So you have a problem. So, for example, people don't have information about to help their autistic children, right? That's a problem, or that is your problem space. But now, how do we then solve that problem, right? So you can actually have your developers, your data scientists, your UX designers, your marketing people, whoever is in your team, who's in the kickoff meeting, so actually participate in this brainstorming activity where, hopefully by the end of the day, they feel invested, right? They're already invested because they've already come up with these, ideas. And also you actually get some new ideas to help you solve the problem, right? Also, you want to make sure that you're actually drawing things out. Just try as much as possible not to write words, but to actually draw stuff, right? So if your idea is to build a website that has all that information, sketch that, right? There's different ways you can have your website, right? So you probably want to sketch different versions of the website, or if you're trying to create like a Slack channel, sketch that, right? Don't try not to use words as much as possible. I think blue sky, right? No idea is too crazy. You're basically going for quantity here, not quality. Basically, you only have 6 minutes. That's the fun part. You only have 6 minutes to come up with 6 ideas, to draw 6 ideas. So how about everyone, whatever idea you have, take the next 6 minutes to draw your idea. I'll start the timer in a few seconds. But basically, uh, you know, come up with 6 ideas and draw them. And I would actually pick 3 people to present their ideas. If I'm able to get 3 people to present their ideas. But yeah, go ahead and do that. I will start the timer. Again, no idea is too crazy. Assume you have all the resources. What would you do to solve this problem? 6 minutes starts now. If you don't have a pen and paper and you need a few minutes, maybe you'll only have enough time for 4 ideas. That's fine. But the idea basically is to actually try this out yourself, to see, how do you feel about, brainstorming like this before you actually do it in an actual team. And also feel free, I'm actually going to start monitoring the chat right now. So if you have any questions about this crazy 6 idea, feel free to write it in the chat and I'll answer it. Yes, your own idea. For those who do the assignment, you probably have your own ideas. So this is for your idea. Hopefully you can actually take this and maybe it would help you get a kickstart, a jump start on solving your problem. Okay, so we have just over 4 minutes left. Again, if you needed to spend 2 minutes to get a pen and paper, that's fine. If you end up with just four solutions, that's fine. It's just practical exercises. Hopefully it would help people remember. you have any questions, feel free to post it in chat. We have about 3 minutes left. Hoping to get at least one person who would be brave enough to present their idea after this. So we have 2 minutes left. No pressure. Okay, we have about a minute left. Okay, just a few seconds left. Okay, so we're at time. Would anyone like to share their idea? Anyone, just raise your hand. See if we have any brave product managers in here. Okay, so Olayemi, would you like to turn on your camera and basically show us what your problem is, your problem statement? Let's start with your problem statement. And then
Hello, everyone. My name is
hi.
I'm Olayemi Ayodeji, a geologist. I have my background in engineering geology. I just transitioned into tech less than a year ago, January this year. So I'm a product designer and I'm looking at product management. The idea I have is something that has I really have a first-hand experience with, and I have someone that is close to me that has experienced this, and it's was postpartum depression, and I've been that's a problem. It's a mental problem, and because depression is something that people take as something spiritual in Nigeria, we really don't take note of it. So I was able to come up with that problem, and the idea I have include this for the solution.
Sorry, sorry. Do you want to say your problem statement? Like the actual problem statement?
Okay, the problem statement is to help people dealing with postpartum depression to find out about the problem, how they're experiencing it, and prefer solution based on the problem. for them. So I came up with a couple of ideas.
Okay.
The first thing is
So sorry, if you have
because
a sorry, if you have it on a piece of paper, do you have it on a piece of paper? The solutions?
yes,
Yeah, maybe you can just
yes.
show it. Okay. You can show it on the camera.
It, oh, I
Awesome.
don't think you're really going to
Okay, okay,
like
okay. That's fine. That's fine.
it,
That's fine.
it's very small. My handwriting is kind of small.
Okay.
So I'm thinking of maybe build, because this is something we don't really talk about. It's something that people shy away from when it comes to mental health, depression, and all that. And, I want to like build a digital solution that connects people to experts in the field, women to experts in the field, so that you don't have to like walk into a psychiatric hospital and be stigmatized as a mad person. So you can just connect with them online, remain anonymous, and you can talk about it. And another Another thing is to create a support community for help, a safe place that women can go to and talk about their problem, where they won't be judged based on what they are going through. And another thing is another idea is to create more awareness about this mental thing, that this is not a spiritual thing, it's an health issue. And because when you give birth, and because maybe the stress of childbirth and all that, you don't like your child or you don't like yourself, it's mental, it's not something that is spiritual. So that awareness is um is really important. We should educate more people about it, because I could realize there was a point that the person involved had to like talk to the mom, and the mom was like, oh, this is my enemies at work, village people at work. It was so serious. And another one is because of the poverty level and all that. Most people, when they feel that, okay, they might argue that this is an illness, I have to take care of it, and the cost of consultation, getting drugs and the medical supplies might be on the high side. So maybe we can also have a platform that would subsidize this fee, or people in critical condition, give them free drugs to help them, help with the symptoms and care for what you're going through. So these are the ideas I've been able to come with within the
Okay.
6 minutes.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you very much. So we're kind of out of time, so we can't go over someone else. But basically, I hope this exercise showed everyone how, within 6 minutes, you can come up with so many ideas, like crazy ideas. The next step basically would be to actually combine, let's see. It will actually be to refine your ideas. We don't have time to do that today. But basically, it just shows you how you can very rapidly, you have a problem, you define the problem, you go through this process very quickly, you can come up with a solution. Within 6 minutes, you just came up with, I think it was 4 or 5 solutions, which is amazing. Yeah, so which is really amazing. So this works. I think it's a really good team building activity, because basically, everyone feels among everyone. You don't have to use everyone's idea, but everyone actually feels among. So yeah, that is really valuable. Hopefully, you find value in that, and you can learn from that. But basically, the next step would be to, let me share my screen. Oops, wrong screen. Yeah, so next step would be to take 3 minutes and come up with 2 ideas, or just, it could be the top two, it could be a combination of what you had. Just basically pick 2 ideas, and then just like before, draw them within 3 minutes, right? Whatever your refined ideas are, and then actually have 3 people. My plan was actually to get 3 people to show what they came up with, but we don't have enough time for that, so we'll just move forward. Okay, so in my case, this was the hypothesis. So basically, after combining these ideas and deciding on like what we want to do in terms of solutions, you then have a hypothesis, right? I'm gonna define the hypothesis later, but basically in this case, my hypothesis was, if customers had an easy way to learn how to use Azure policies for AKS, they would be able to set up more secure and automatically governed clusters more rapidly. accelerating the adoption of new workloads on AKS, leading to more Azure consumption and reducing customer churn. Basically, my hypothesis is if we were to make it easier, right, for customers to learn how to use this feature, right, we would actually get all these benefits. That is the hypothesis. We can test it, right? We can test it by basically, making some version of the solution, the learn module, and see if customer churn actually gets moved. So basically, the team has a direction. They need to build something that would allow them to build to test this hypothesis very quickly, right? Let's not forget about lean product management. We want to be able to very quickly decide, what is a good idea, what is not a good idea. Using that hypothesis makes it, into like a scientific experiment to see whether or not what we're actually saying or what we're assuming is actually true. So further on that is basically a continuation of that. By providing an easy way for customers to learn about how to properly use Azure policies for AKS, they can use that knowledge to quickly set up policies for their subscription that will keep their clusters compliant, cutting the time they need to onboard their workloads to AKS, leading to more Azure consumption. So basically, also in this meeting, in addition to the team building activity and what I mentioned before, we also want to highlight what success looks like to the team, so they're excited and they understand the goal, they understand the vision. So you want to paint a picture of what the solution, of what the world will look like. What would the world look like when the solution is available, right? That's basically the product vision. You want to define exactly what are the next steps to get there, and then you want to organize the team, organize everything that the team needs to get started. So questions, we don't really have that for questions right now, so we're gonna move on to the next step. If it's any very, very important questions, I would give like 30 seconds to let someone actually ask the question, and then I'll just move on. Okay, Adiyemi, you have the question? No? Okay. So I'm gonna go ahead and okay. Yeah, I think you might want to stop raising your hand. Okay, so next section, MVP. I'm sure everyone has heard what MVP is. So what is an MVP? Minimum viable product. I'm sure most people have probably heard about this. But basically, it's the smallest version of a product that you can build, push out there, and get real feedback from users about whether or not they would actually use this product, right? So again, with lean with lean product development, you want to be able to very rapidly test your hypothesis, like the one that I mentioned earlier, and actually determine whether or not what you're trying to do actually makes sense, if anyone's actually going to use it, or if it's just something that you and your team imagined and it's not really a real problem, right? So basically, what is an MVP? It's basically a process, it's an experiment, it's not exactly a product, right? I know there's lots of misconception who, people assume that the MVP is like a prototype or something. That is not exactly the case. It's more of a process, right? You want to understand or test your assumption very, very quickly, right? They're primarily designed to test hypotheses and assumptions that you may have. Like if you had a science experiment, you start with assumptions, you have hypotheses, you have minimal criteria for success, and you go about testing that hypothesis, right? Through a process called validated learning, right? So what is validated learning? It's basically anything you can learn from a customer that is done in a test environment, and it's done in a way that you're not biasing the customers, ensuring that they're not under undue pressure, and ensuring that they're able to act naturally within that environment to help you make decisions on whether or not this idea is actually feasible, right? So for example, let's think about yourself walking down the path, you reach a fork on the road and you don't know which way to go. Right? So you have your development team, you're walking down the path and you don't know which direction to go. There's different options you can go. You can actually go with. Well, there's different ways you can do it. You can actually go into, one of the towns or shout, you know, into like one of the towns and ask the people, guys, like which direction do you think is the best one, right? And they can probably be like, oh, you know what, like this is the best one because blah 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 blah, right? That's just basically answering the question. They're telling you that our path is the best one because blah blah blah. But is that actually the case, right? A better idea would actually be to walk each path, or another idea would actually be test each path. You don't want to go too far down the path. You don't want to sprint all the way down the path. You want to just take a few steps into each path and see whether or not this is actually a good idea. And I'll give a classical example of someone using an MVP experiment to test his assumption. Basically, he wanted to his assumption or his hypothesis was that if people had a website where they could buy shoes, people would actually use that website to buy shoes, right? So what did he do? Did he set up a big organization with a warehouse, bought a bunch of shoes, and actually store them in there, and actually built a full-fledged website and a full-fledged supply process to supply those shoes to customers? No, he actually didn't do that. What he actually did was he made a very simple website. He would actually go on to the stores close to his house, right? And then he would actually find shoes that he thinks really make sense and put those shoes on his website, pretending like he actually has those shoes to sell. And then when customers actually order on his website, he would then walk down to the store, get the shoe, ship it to the customers, right? So basically, he was able to test whether or not his assumption that people would actually buy shoes online is actually true or not. So basically, the goal is to test a hypothesis, right? In this case, he had an hypothesis, was able to test it, was able to validate it, and he was actually successful. You also want to mitigate risk of losing resources, right? So you don't want to spend too much time. There's always a risk when you try out a new venture. You start a new product or a feature. There's always a risk there, right? You can waste time, right? If you spend too much time developing this feature, and actually that's the wrong feature to develop, and your competitors actually, build the right feature, you might actually lose that opportunity to capture those customers. You might also lose money, right? It's going to cost a lot of money to develop these resources. So you might lose money. You might also have opportunity costs, right? So the time that you actually spending developing this, you're not able to develop something else. So basically, one of the important concepts within lean product development or agile is speed, right? That's basically where the mantra of fail fast comes from. I'm not sure if you've heard of fail fast, but basically the idea is if you fail fast, run your experiments quickly, collect more data quickly. It means that you're likely to find the correct path out of all these different options. You're able to have a successful product and feature a lot faster. So generally, if you're a startup, right, if you're a very tiny organization, is very, very important because you have limited resources, right? You probably don't have product market fit yet. You don't have anything basically powering your organization. You need to basically fail really, really fast. You don't have as much risk room to take too many risks, right? You can't afford to waste resources because you only have so much money, right? In this case, usually you're probably not just a PM, you're probably more of a co-founder, right? Because really small startups generally don't have designated PMs. But basically my point here is a startup scenario is very different from a real organization, right? And usually PMs work in, like bigger organizations. So generally the larger the organization, the more of a cushion that they have, right? They have a higher tolerance for risk, right? So they're probably not as concerned about wasting money, they're more likely to, the more concerned with other things, right? So when you work in a big company, you're more likely to work on a product that is not the actual core product, right? So, like, let's give an example. So, so basically, basically what I'm trying to explain how PM works in medium to large size organizations. They obviously they don't want to waste resources, right? They don't just the fact that they have a lot of money doesn't mean they actually want to waste it. So it is still important to be careful with the way you use these resources, but they do have more bandwidth, right? So these organizations tend to de-emphasize resources as a hard constraint compared with as a startup. But they care more about the brand, right? So for example, Google, if they were to come up with a new product, they don't care as much about how much money they would waste if that product doesn't succeed. But they do care about the brand, right? Like if it's a really, really bad product that's really bad for their brand, that would cost them much more than the amount of money they would waste on developing up a product. So large organizations would prioritize, more of stuff like the brand and the opportunity cost than the actual money that they're spending on those. So for example, I'm not sure if everyone knows about Google Glass, but basically Google Glass was, as you can see in the picture, basically allows you to do certain things without having to use your phone. Their assumption was people would actually be willing to put this on their face. I don't know who would actually do that, but obviously the product failed. But did this crash Google? No, I don't think so. Right? Was this bad for their brand? Some you might say maybe it was, but in actual fact, on the other side of the coin, it was a good thing for them because it showed everyone, it showed the whole world that this is an innovative organization. They're actually willing to take chances and actually innovate and actually try out very new things, and that probably helped their brand, even though they wasted all that money and it was a failed product. It probably helped their brand more than anything, right? So basically, I think what I'm trying to say is that there's a PM, you don't always have to think like a scrappy, 2% startup who doesn't really have money, unless you are. If you're a startup, then obviously that's very, very different. But failed products can actually benefit in other ways, right? So the team that actually developed the Google Glass, whatever they learn from that, they can actually use that to enhance other products within Google. So what I'm trying to say is you need to understand where your organization sits, how critical these things are, and that would actually guide the direction of your MVP experiment. So we talked about MVPs, we talked about considerations on the organization. What are the steps that you actually take for an MVP? Well, the first one obviously is product and solution ideation, which we just did, right? Everyone just got through that exercise. You have the idea, you have to identify the problem and make sure that it's actually a real problem, and then you ideate on solutions, right? That's the first step. The second step is basically to identify your assumptions, right? So in this case, their assumption was people don't want to have to use their phones to do stuff, right? They want to be able to use, I guess, their eyes to do things. And also their assumption was people are actually willing to put this thing on their face and walk around on the street. So you want to identify your assumptions and actually find the riskiest assumptions. You want to build a hypothesis around that assumption. Basically, you want to be able to test that assumption, right? To help you decide whether or not this is the right path to take. You want to define the minimum criteria for success. This is really, really important because if you don't, then how do you know if your experiment result was yes, let's do this, or no, let's not do this, or we need to be careful, right? You also want to pick a strategy, a type of MVP that you want to do. And then basically you want to execute, iterate, evaluate, execute, and so on, right? So those are basically the steps. So first step, identify assumptions. You want to write down all of your assumptions, right? So this could be, based on your observation, you feel like people don't like using their phones. They would just like to be able to use, their eyes, right? Or people are actually willing to put stuff on their face that helps them see, do complete tasks without having to use their hands, right? So those are some of the assumptions based on your observation or your intuition. You feel, or it could also, in terms of observation, it could also be things your customer said, right? Or the things you noticed during your customer interviews. You'll notice that, this is actually happening. You're assuming that all customers have the same problem, right? It's also very, very important when you're in this stage to assume that you don't know anything, right? You might think that you know something, but anything that you think that hasn't been verified and tested and hasn't been, released in the market is an assumption, right? So you have to have that mantra. In order for my idea to be, so one of the ways you can actually define these assumptions or identify assumption is to start with the statement. In order for my idea to be successful, the following must be true. So for example, one of the things that must be true is that customers actually want to govern their AKS clusters. Another assumption is customers don't know how to govern the AKS clusters, right? So it's difficult to learn how to govern their AKS clusters, right? For my project to be successful, those have to be true, right? You're probably going to come up with a whole bunch of assumptions. You probably want to focus on the big ones. You don't want to start with the small ones, because if we start with the small ones and then you spend all this time, verifying 5 different small assumptions, and then you get to the big one, well, guess what? You just wasted all that time taking care of these small ones, when this big one just like prove that this project is not feasible. Okay, so another way of generating ideas is just start with a statement. I assume that my customer has XYZ problem, right? Or I assume that dash, matters to my customer. My customers care about how difficult it is to learn how to secure their clusters. Or that I assume that my customers will pay for this feature. Or there's no significant satisfactory substitute. So like when you think about these 4 things, you can actually come up with lots of assumptions based on that actually fall into these categories. So basically, assumption. So again, once I identify our assumption, right? So problem is customers find it difficult to use Azure policies to govern their AKS clusters. Solution: create a learning module to teach them how to use Azure policies to govern their AKS clusters, right? So what are the assumptions? What assumptions can you actually think of that I'm making? So I'm gonna give everyone 10 seconds to just think of what kind of assumptions am I making at this point. Just 10 seconds, just think about it. I'm gonna move on to the next slide. Okay, so here are some of the assumptions that I basically came up with, right? So for my idea to be successful, these following need to be true. Or for it to be very, very successful, these have to be true, right? Customers want to govern their AKS clusters. If they don't care about that, my whole project is scrap, right? Azure policies for AKS is an effective way to govern AKS clusters, right? There's another assumption. Customers find it difficult to use Azure policies for AKS. Customers find it difficult to learn how to use Azure policies for AKS. Customers would use Microsoft Learn to learn how to use Azure resources. People are not satisfied using documentation to learn how to use Azure policies for AKS. So we do have some substitutes. We have some documentation, but they don't actually give you step-by-step scenarios of how you can use it. Customers are willing to invest time and resources to learn how to use Azure policies for AKS, right? If they don't care about, like, if they don't have time, then obviously they're not going to use it, or they're not going to use my learning module. The hour-long interactive exercises, theories, knowledge, checks provided by the learning module will be enough to teach customers how to use Azure policies for AKS properly. Obviously, if it's not enough, then my ultimate goal of getting customers started quickly will not work, right? Because if they're not learning enough, they still have to go Google stuff. Then basically it's not as successful. We have enough contributors to develop a Microsoft Learn module to teach customers how to use Azure policies. If I'm not able to get people to help me develop this module, or if I don't have time to develop this module myself, then obviously that's not going to happen. Microsoft product team and executives would approve of a Learn module to teach customers how to use Azure policies for AKS. If the leadership team are like, nope, we're not going to do that, or the product team are like, oh, we're just coming up with this automated feature, there's no need for that anymore, then my project is failed, right? So these are just some ways to like think of assumptions. Next step, find the riskiest assumption, right? So focus on the riskiest one. So going back, so one of the ways you can actually focus, because obviously this is a lot of assumptions, right? You can actually go back to what I mentioned earlier, which are like these basic assumptions, right? And that a lot of my assumptions actually fall under these categories. So basically, starting from the bottom, which is having substitutes, doesn't actually, the assumption which was that there are no substitutes or effective substitutes. Basically, my assumption was that there's no effective substitute for customers to learn, right? That was the assumption. But the thing is, having a substitute doesn't actually mean that your solution will not be successful, right? I mean, it could set it back a little bit. Maybe it's not as needed as some other things we could probably work on, but the fact that it's substitutes like Microsoft Docs doesn't actually mean that it's not going to be successful, right? Think about the case of like old mobile phones, for example, like, before BlackBerries, before smartphones began dominating the market. If you ask people back in the day if they're satisfied with their Nokia 3310, they would say yes, like 3310 was awesome. But guess what? Like, who would actually use a 3310 right now? All right. The next one would not having an easy way to learn how to use Azure policies on AKS clusters, not really mad. I guess the next question is people are not willing to pay for the problem. Well, we're actually not trying to make money off this Learn module. We're trying to make money off people using AKS. We're trying to get people to use AKS more easily to solve their business problems, right? So we're actually not trying to make to get people to pay money for this feature. We like pay money for the feature being the Learn module, right? The next one matters to my customers, may not be a big game changer. So it's going back here, like this feature actually matters to my customer. Well, if it happens that it doesn't matter as much to my customers, that could be a problem, right? That could actually be a problem. Like if customers don't care that they have to spend all this time learning, right? Like let's assume it doesn't matter. Like customers don't care because these customers are tech savvy people and they're used to having to go through Google. They're used to having to read documentation to figure out how to use certain technologies. This might actually impact the value of the learning module that I'm trying to develop, right? Basically, customers don't care about this feature because they're already used to, having to struggle to get it, right? This might actually impact it, but is it a game changer? Is it really going to make my feature unsuccessful just because people are used to a bad system of learning stuff? No, but it could pretty significantly be a setback. But the thing is, we have this thing called marketing, right? Marketing, their job is to convince people to care about things that they didn't previously care about. So maybe marketing can promote the fact that the learning module will get them started more quickly and more properly. And it's part of the new paradigm at Microsoft where we care about helping customers be more successful more quickly, better than before. So maybe we don't want customers struggling anymore. We want customers to be able to learn stuff very, very quickly. So even though it doesn't matter to customers right now, marketing can actually make it matter to customers. Finally, because this customer is not having the problem at all. Like let's assume that customers actually don't have trouble using AKS policies, right? Like, that is a really big problem, right? Or let's say like customers. So let's say customers don't have any trouble learning about how to use the policies, or customers don't actually care about securing their clusters, or customers don't actually care about like they actually don't care about securing the clusters, or customers are using a different feature to secure the clusters. They're not using policies. No one's actually using policies, or no one has any problems with policies, because policies is actually so easy. But I thought policies were difficult, right? That is a game changer. That right there is a game changer, because if there's no problem, like what are we doing? If there's no problem, what are we doing? Basically, this is a case of having a solution that's looking for a problem, and that is never a good scenario to be with, right? So obviously, that would definitely be the riskiest one. So basically, we want to identify the assumption that customers actually care about securing the clusters. They actually care about using policies, and they actually find it difficult to use the policies for their clusters. So, which are the riskiest? The ones that I have circled in green are the riskiest based on what I just said. So customers do, my assumption is that customers actually do want to govern their AKS clusters, right? If that's not true, then we have a big problem. Azure policy for AKS is an effective way to govern the clusters. If that's not true, if everyone is using something else, that's a big problem. My project is obviously going to fail. Customers find it difficult to use Azure policies for AKS, right? If they don't have any trouble with it, if it's super easy, then why do we need a learn module, right? Or customers find it difficult to learn how to use AKS policies. Well, maybe they don't find it difficult. Maybe there's this result that basically you click next, and everything is set up for them. Then obviously there is no reason to learn how to do it, right? So those are kind of the biggest, riskiest assumptions, and those are the ones that we want to focus on testing with our MVP. But the first two basically is not my job, because George, remember the guy that I showed you guys earlier? His job is basically to build AKS product, and his team have already determined that our customers need to govern their AKS clusters. That's just fact. Everyone cares about security now, right? No one wants to have their clusters open or their Azure resources open to the internet where anyone can actually hack and steal information and all that kind of stuff. No one actually wants that. So we do know the first one is definitely, or at least figuring out whether or not that is true. It's not my job. It's someone else's job, right? We basically work in little teams to make overall everything successful, right? It's not possible for everyone to work on everything, right? So that first point will not really apply to me in this case. Also, the fact that Azure policies for AKS is an effective way to govern AKS clusters. Also, it's not my job, right? The product team basically built this feature, and they have already determined that customers are actually using this feature. It's already built. There's no doubt that it's actually working, because we have data that shows that customers are actually using this for the AKS clusters. But my job is to say, do customers actually find it difficult to use these policies? What if the product teams make it so amazing that there's actually no difficulty? Maybe I'm just the dumb one who like doesn't understand how to use it when it's so easy to use, right? If that is the case, then my whole project is is useless, right? Same thing with making it difficult to learn, right? Even if it's difficult to apply these policies, if it's quite straightforward to learn how to do it, then there's no reason to build another model or another module to show how to deploy it, right? So basically, the items in green are the ones that I'm going to focus on. So back to the hypothesis, right? So next step, now that I've decided which assumptions I want to test, the next step is basically to write a hypothesis. What is a hypothesis? Well, really simple definition is a single written testable statement of what you believe to be true with respect to the assumptions that you've identified. That's just what a hypothesis is. It has to be written, it has to be documented. It has to be testable, extremely important. If you can't test it, basically it's not a hypothesis, right? You believe that is true. You need to basically prove that that is true, right? So that's the whole point of running the experiment, to test your hypothesis. So basically, you decided to understand. We decided in this case to understand who is having trouble using and learning how to use Azure policies for AKS, right? We need to understand, like basically for this experiment, we've decided that these are our goals. We need to understand why they're having trouble, right? Is it because it's actually difficult? Is that, is it, like why? That question, why, is very, very important, right? You can't really do something without understanding why that is happening. You want to maybe focus on a singular hypothesis. You probably don't have resources to do multiple at the same time. You also want to be lean, right? You don't want to spend, multiple resources testing multiple different things, and then one of them ends up failing, and the work of these other 5 teams basically just got wasted. You just wasted your time, right? And it also brings, we also want to bring clarity to the team, because with the hypothesis defined, we know exactly what exactly what we need to test with our MVP experiment. We can actually design our MVP experiment to basically help identify, debunk or prove that hypothesis, right? But in general, let's try to be creative, right? Let's see if we can design an experiment that kills multiple assumption birds with one MVP stone, right? So if we can combine an experiment that actually combines these two, like basically simultaneously test those two, then we're basically killing multiple assumption birds with one MVP stone. So putting it all together for the hypothesis. Hypothesis is actionable, right? The biggest difference between an assumption and a hypothesis is that a hypothesis is actionable. You can actually do something about it. You can actually measure it and so on. You have to define a target group, right? Who are the people that we're going to run this experiment on? Define an expected outcome. So we expect that when we run this experiment, we would actually determine that customers are actually finding it difficult to use this policy, and they're also finding it difficult to learn how to use the policy. And and also we want to basically what we expect them to do. Right? We have to define that. We have to define what we expect the people that we're running the experiments on, what we expect them to do. If they don't do that, then basically our hypothesis is wrong. So here's my hypothesis for this MVP, right? We believe that AKS customers have trouble implementing Azure policies for AKS. If we create a form about a course that teaches students how to use this feature, we believe that at least 50 cloud solutions architects, basically Cloud solutions architects are people who work directly with the customers, and basically they understand the customers, they help the customers solve their problems, so they know the customers best, right? I work for a corporate team. I don't have enough time or bandwidth to talk to hundreds of customers every day. That's where the CSAs come in. So if I'm able to create a form that that basically tells the CSAs, guess what? We're building this course, and this is why we're building this course. If the CSAs believe these assumptions, right? If they believe that customers find it difficult to use these policies, and they believe that it's difficult to learn how to use these policies, they would sign up. If they don't believe that is a problem, they would just ignore it. They're not going to sign up, right? So we believe that AKS customers have trouble implementing Azure policies for AKS. If we create a form about a course that teaches students how to use this feature, we believe that at least 50 CSAs, we have the number there, we have a goal, will sign up because their customers need a better way to learn how to use the feature. So we've noticed this, right? Work from Microsoft is really important for us to have a good brand. This is a very, very easy and very low risk way of testing my assumption, because I'm basically talking to my coworkers. I'm not talking to employees, right? So I can pretend and make it seem like we have a course. Guess what, guys? We have a course. Sign up here and you can have access to the course. Your customers will also have access to the course. But guess what? I mean, or we can make it seem. We can make it seem, because again, it's very important to simulate an environment where we're not influencing them, right? If we tell them that, like, if it's not the right environment, then our test will basically fail. So basically, we're making it seem that we live in a world where this course already exists. Let's see how people will react. Will people actually sign up to this course or not, right? That is basically where the concept of creating an environment where you're not biasing them. You're not telling them you have to sign up to this. We're not telling them, you know, like, this is how you should help customers do it. We're just telling them, we have a course. Let us know if you're interested in this course. So minimal criteria for success, basically, if our hypothesis is that if we change let's give a hypothetical example. If our hypothesis is if we change this red button to green, people would actually buy more. And it turns out that they, after we made that change and ran the experiment, 2% of the people bought more, right? Or let's say, there wasn't more people buying, but people actually buying it more frequently, or people were actually buying more frequently. They weren't buying more every time they bought stuff, but they're actually buying more frequently. Is it worth spending 3 months or 6 months developing this feature? That's the question, right? Obviously, we had some progress, but does that progress, is it enough to justify 3 months of development time? It depends on the company and the internal calculations that they choose to use. We need to define a concept called minimum criteria for success, which is basically drawing a line on the sand that definitively distinguish all, basically we're all good to go. Like once we cross this line, we're all good to go, right? Why is this important? Well, if you forget to define your minimal criteria for success, MCS, you may end up, conflating a valid hypothesis with a clear sign to proceed, right? You might actually not know whether or not, even though you run the experiments, you don't know whether or not you should go or not go. You can validate your hypothesis in a way that, also like you can validate your hypothesis in a way that it's actually still not worth proceeding. For example, in my example, my minimal criteria was if 50 CSAs sign up to this course, then we're good to go. It means that this course is actually useful, right? But if I get 30 CSAs, that's still a lot of CSAs. That's still a lot of people who think this is valuable. But is it enough? Do we still want to spend the time developing this course? Probably no, right? So that's basically where the minimum criteria for success comes in. It gives you experiment clarity and meaning. And we are not just improving stuff, right? We're not just helping the tiny fraction of our customers. We're actually trying to improve stuff by X amount. And having a number there actually gives you a sense of scale. So when you're trying to define the minimum criteria for success, you want to consider the rewards. Oops. sorry, there's I think there's some mistakes here, but basically, you want to consider the rewards and you want to consider the cost, basically. So the rewards could be when we create this feature, customers are happier with Azure, right? They're happier with their experience. Or it could be that people are actually able to deploy the clusters faster, which means we can actually start making money faster. Or it could be like more people would actually consider using AKS because now there's a very easy way to use it, right? So those are some of the benefits. Some of the costs would be, I need to have 10 engineers spend 6 months developing this. I have to pay them, or I have to host this learning module somewhere that costs money, right? Or like there's lots of things that you need to consider, but basically you want to consider the rewards versus the cost, and then basically that would help you guide decision on the minimum criteria for success. Okay, so what are the different ways you can actually run MVP experiments, right? Obviously, the whole point of running an MVP experiment is you do not have a product, because if you had a product, you wouldn't be running the experiment. You would just send it out to the market and have people try it out, right? And then that would basically be your answer, right? But you don't have a product. You're trying to, or you don't have a fully developed product. You're trying to test whether or not it's worth spending the time to build that product, right? So the extent of the fake will determine the MVP method that you would use, right? If you don't have a product, you have to create an environment that simulates a world where you have that product in order not to bias your users, right? So you might have to get a little bit creative on how you run your experiment to make it so the customers actually react the exact same way they would react if that product actually existed. Otherwise, you're basically giving them suggestions on how you are going to solve their problem. So there's multiple ways to do that. You can have emails. Basically, what you need is to have an email list of clients, and basically email them and be like, we have this feature, like, are you interested? Like, like that's basically the simplest type of MVP experiments. You don't even have to build anything, right? You just, make it seem like you have this product and you basically email your clients. It requires that you have to have users, right? So this usually applies to product that already exists and you have users and you're trying to see if this new feature actually makes sense, right? So you see how people react to your email telling them that this product exists or this product is coming, right? Yeah, so basically you want to simulate the environment of a world where this product actually exists. Obviously you need to be really good at wordsmithing. You don't want to lie to your customers, don't lie to your customers, but you can kind of make it seem like, you have the product or you have something similar or the product is coming and you want to see their thoughts on that. You can also use shadow boxing. Basically, you would put a button on your website. For example, some websites, you have different login options. You can log in with email, you can log in with Facebook, you can log in with, Google, right? But it takes time to develop those features, right? So how about you just put a login button there that says sign in with Facebook and see if anyone actually clicks on that button, right? So if lots of people actually click on it, then that customers actually want to be able to sign in with Facebook or they want to actually sign in with Google, right? Before that, you don't know. You're just making an assumption that customers want this feature, but you don't know. So if you have the button there, it basically helps you collect the data that you need to determine whether or not this feature actually makes sense. So sometimes the button, you make it so that the button doesn't do anything, or it takes you to a coming soon page and says, oh, we actually don't have the feature yet, but it's actually coming soon. So type your, sign up for notifications and we'll let you know when this feature is actually available. It could also take you to like a 404 page. Basically, is an error sorted by web pages when the page that you're requesting does not exist, right? So it's just going to take a page that says, sorry, this page does not exist, right? you wouldn't, as a user, you're probably not even going to think anything of it. You're going to be like, oh, well, I guess, that page doesn't exist. I'm just going to move on, right? So there's lots of different ways you can use the shadow button. You can actually, like, if you can make it seem like you had a feature or maybe like a new service on your website, and then the more people click on it, the more, people actually want to use that service. You can also have a Kickstarter page. Basically, you talk about your product on the Kickstarter page, and people can actually donate to help you develop that product. So the more people actually donate, the more people actually want this feature. Also, it helps you raise money that you can use to develop your product. You can also, like I said, these buttons, you can take them to a page where you ask them to sign up so that they know when these features are available. There's some downside. For example, your brand might actually get a hit. So if, for example, people start thinking that you're not honest, like, like your website's not working, or there's something wrong with your website, or you guys didn't build your website properly, then that might actually affect your brand, right? But guess who actually uses this? Amazon actually uses this all the time. People don't actually know this. They probably noticed it, but they haven't actually thought anything of it, right? So you can have basically Amazon, which is one of the largest companies in the world, actually uses this. So it's helpful. It really does. It really is. So Explainer MVP basically is an MVP where you have a video. It could be like a tutorial, or it's actually a sales explainer. So we've all seen adverts, right? We've seen adverts of on TV and on the internet, and basically these advertisements actually show like a product, right? And they're like, oh, we have this product, come buy it, blah 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 blah, right? People would actually see it, and they would actually think it's an actual product that exists, and then they try to access it, and then they find out that, oh, by the way, it doesn't exist yet, but sign up here, right? The more people actually click on it, the more this is useful. Same thing with the tutorials as well. Usually, this takes a little bit of work because your videos have to make it seem like that product actually exists, right? You're basically clicking on stuff, but in the back end, when you click on stuff, it actually doesn't do anything, right? You can just change the slide, and then it makes it, when you edit the videos, you make it seem like, it's actually working, but it's actually not. It might be a lot easier to edit videos and make videos and presentations than to actually build this feature, right? So that will basically help you determine whether or not this feature is useful. And here we have Dropbox actually did that before they actually launched Dropbox. You also have pitch experiments and fake landing zones. Basically, a pitch experiment is an online audience, is an experiment where you have an online audience where you pitch a product or feature to a group of people and see what they do. It's basically online. Landing pages are a natural fit for this because basically a landing page is one singular page that explains the feature of a product, right? So basically you're trying to pitch this product to people using a landing page or otherwise, and then you see how people actually react to this. You could also have a call to action within the landing page that says, please sign up, or please prepay, like, pre-order this feature, or fill out the form, right? So the more people fill out the form, the more people actually want this. So my MVP basically was to design a learning. What I actually basically did was I designed learning objective for the Microsoft Learning module. I basically had a bunch of points that when the user finishes this course, this is what they will be able to do, right? So I defined the objective of that course. I haven't actually developed the course yet. I just said, when users go through this course, this is what they will be able to do, right? And then I designed a sign up page for CSAs to sign up for the course. Basically, I said, we have this new feature, which is Agile policies for AKS, and we have this course. If you feel like your customers would benefit from this, please sign up so you can have access to it, right? It takes a little time. Basically, I had to spend 30 minutes figuring out what the objective of this course should actually be, and also make a form, right? There's no risk to our brand because I'm not sending this to our customers. I'm sending this to our internal employees, right? Also, I have minimum criteria for success, which is basically I need 50 CSAs to sign up. If 50 CSAs don't sign up, I'm not going to spend any time to develop this course. So now it's your turn, guys. Define your assumption, just like I did. We're going to be sharing the slide, so hopefully that helps. You can pick your top assumptions or assumption. You can create a hypothesis and basically design your experiment, just like I did, right? So basically, I'm going to show you what my experiment looks like. Okay, so this is basically my experiment. This is my whole experiment. This whole thing took me like 45 minutes, or actually, what am I saying? Maybe 30 minutes. Basically, it's a form that I'm going to send to a whole bunch of, being in a corporate role, I'm able to send to lots of customer CSAs around the world. And basically, I can be like, okay, Azure policy for AKS training. Sign up here. We have Azure policies add-on is now GA, and we're launching training material, blah, 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 blah. It takes about an hour, basically showing them that it's only going to take an hour. So customers, when they go to the website, they know that it's only an hour long. Would they, if they know that it's an hour long, would they actually sign up to this course or not, right? So being specific actually simulates that environment of this course actually existing, right? So by letting them know how long it would take, if I said, if it's actually going to be 5 hours and I put 5 hours here, well, maybe less CSS will sign up to it. And that basically tells me that don't develop a 5-hour course. Maybe you need to make it shorter. And then I run that experiment again and I iterate that way. So basically, these are the learning objectives to help customers rapidly learn how to blah, 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 right? And the goal is to improve velocity of deploying well-governed, secure workloads on AKS, ultimately accelerating, blah, blah, blah. So this is basically stuff that CSOs care about. So if they feel like this is something their customers actually need, they will sign up to this course. And that's my experiment. So back to the assignment, try to run your experiment, figure out what your assumptions are. And in the next class, I would have a few people present their experiment. And also, these are the topics we're going for the last class. We're going to be conceptualizing the solution using prototypes. So basically showing different ways of prototyping your solutions or your potential products, right? Matrices for product managers, like I said before, product management for product managers, technologies for product managers, and if we have enough time, we'll do this as well. I know we're out of time, we're a little bit over time. Do we have any questions? Any questions? No questions? Okay. Yeah, well, that's it for today. Thanks everyone for joining, and I'll see you next week.